Good evening. It's good to see each and every one of you that chose to be with us tonight. Some of you are visiting. Thank you. We're glad that you're here. We're thankful that you came our way. Excited about the lesson tonight. It's one that comes from our reading for the week, and we'll get to that in just a moment. What's interesting is how accustomed folks get to things. I'm just accustomed to things being where they ought to be, when they ought to be, and every time I get up in the pulpit on Sunday night, the remote to advance the slides is right here. And so I walked right up in here and I went just like this and I said, it's not here. And so hopefully the men in the booth are listening and they will bring me what? Let me tell you how accustomed I am to this being right here. That was funny. You're welcome. I didn't even intend to do that, but I'm like, where is my... Okay. That makes me look pretty much like an idiot. But welcome. We're glad to be here. I'm excited about the lesson tonight. I intend to be a little brief, given that we're going to have some time of fellowship here after a while. We are in the book of Proverbs. If you do happen to be following along chronologically, I think many of us are. We took on this endeavor January 1 to be reading through the Bible chronologically, and so we find ourselves in the book of Proverbs. As you know from the book of Proverbs, some sections are along the lines of the same topic, while others stand individual. In other words, there might be one, and you read the verse, and you read the next verse, and it has nothing to do with the other. This is one of those standalone nuggets, I guess, of practical wisdom from the book of Proverbs. So if we'll get the PowerPoint started, we'll pick up with this verse that was our reading. Now, I've titled the lesson, and I went back and forth as to how I would title the lesson. But I landed on a very familiar term, mind your own business. Have you ever heard the term mind your own business? I think we've all probably heard that term. It actually is in the Bible. We'll look a little bit later at this idea of minding your own business. But from the proverb, and we'll read it, there are some potential perils and a problem with not minding your own business. The practical caution is, if you don't mind your own business, you may find yourself in a painful or a difficult situation. More specifically, let's read the proverb again. Proverb 26, and let's read verse 17 there. Proverbs 26 and verse 17. He who passes by and meddles in a quarrel not his own is like one who takes a dog by the ears. And this was the picture that I thought would go best with my title slide. Mind your own business. Let's talk about it. First, let's note the problem. Then we'll mention the peril. And then we'll note a few practical points at the end. What's the problem? Well, the problem is you are merely passing by. I think the words that we highlight in this proverb are essential. Because there are times, and we'll mention this in the practical component, there are times that you do need to be concerned about somebody else's business. But we'll talk about that. But you're just passing by. Have you ever had someone offer you some unsolicited advice as they were just passing by? You didn't even know them. They could have been a stranger. You know what you ought to do? I'm quick to want to say, you know what you ought to do is mind your own business. But here's this notion of you are just passing by. In Lamentation chapter 2, and you might remember following Jeremiah, it's the laments of Jeremiah over the city of Jerusalem that's been ransacked and destroyed. And he's kind of viewing the city and noting how sad it is and lamenting. And one of the things he said is, all who pass by shake their heads. Can you believe Jerusalem is in such a state? These people claim that their God was superior to every other God, and look where they are now. And everybody just pass by and shake their head. Or in Ezekiel chapter 37, we find this word when Ezekiel was taken to the valley of dry bones and he was made to pass by the bones. He would pass by this whole valley and all the bones that lay there. You're just passing by. What does passing by imply? Well, you ain't been there this whole time. You're not privy to all the particulars of this, and I'll get to the quarrel in just a moment and define it a tad. But this contention or strife or quarrel that's happening between these individuals, you don't know all the details. You just seem to pass by and you've summed it up and you're going to just interject. That's the problem. He uses a term that kind of is archaic. I don't know if you use the word metal, but we'll look at some, synonyms, and we'll get to the practical component. But this idea of metal is to involve yourself, I always say, unsolicited. Unsolicited. You ever had someone tell you, you know what your problem is? You ever heard that before? Who are you to tell me what my problem is? We're not friends like that. This idea of metal, I want to go over, and while we're in Proverbs, let's look at Proverbs 14, and then we'll go over this passage in 2 Kings. Proverbs chapter 14 now. Look at verse 16. Look at verse 16. It says, a wise man fears and departs from evil. But it goes on to say, a fool rages and is self-confident. Now, you don't see the word metal in there, do you? But it's the same Hebrew word, same underlying root word in the Hebrew. For which word? Rages. Think about this. Here's the image. Well, one person says, well, I see this and I'm going to depart. The other person says, I'm rushing right in. So what's this mean in terms of metal? You're just passing by, and instead of saying, I'm going to depart, because that's the opposite of raging in, rushing in, and just jumping right in. I'm going to depart. Instead, you say, oh, well, I'm just passing by. Here's two people in a quarrel. I'm just going to rush right in. That's the problem. Now, we're going to get to the peril. What can you expect? What will be the results if you're not careful? All right, but let's go over quickly to 2 Kings, but you might mark Proverbs. We're going to go back. Look at 2 Kings chapter 14. 2 Kings chapter 14. Here we have in Amaziah, the king of Judah. I won't set up all the context, look at all the particulars. You can read for yourself after a while. But Amaziah had decided he was going to intervene in the affairs of Israel. He was the king over Judah, and he had had a victory over the people of Edom, the Edomites. And he was kind of, hey man, I just had this great victory. I tell you what, I'm going to go fight somebody else. So he decides he's going to do that. And look at 2 Kings chapter 14 and note the response of the king of Israel. Look at verse 10. You have indeed defeated Edom, and your heart has lifted you up. Glory in that, and stay at home. For why should you meddle with trouble so that you fall, you and Judah with you? Why are you getting involved in something that doesn't pertain to you, creating, stirring up, rushing in, agitating this situation? You've got your own affairs at home. Why are you involving yourself and meddling in my affairs? If you do that, I'm going to squash you. And that's exactly what the king of Israel did militarily, squashed him. And he went home, as they would say, with his tail between his legs because he got whooped. He shouldn't have been meddling in that. I think we appreciate meddle. We'll look at some synonyms a little later. So here's the problem. You're just passing by. Now you've rushed in to a quarrel. It's not yours. This word for quarrel can be used of strife or contention. Do you remember when Abraham and Lot, their herdsmen had a strife? Y'all remember that? And ultimately what Abraham would say was, there's plenty of land. You want what's on the right, I'll take what's on the left. You want what's on the left, I'll take what's on the right. You remember this? But there was strife between the herdsmen about where they would settle in the land and who would dwell where. It's the same word. Quarrel, strife, contention, disagreement, argument, problem, conflict, whatever. And if you turn over to Proverbs chapter 20, look at verse 3 there. Look at Proverbs 20 and note with me verse 3. It is honorable for a man to stop striving, since any fool can start a quarrel. That's the same word, quarrel. But you know, any fool can jump right into somebody else's quarrel too. And so here's this caution, this problem. You're just a passerby. You've decided to rush and jump right in to a fight, a strife, a conflict. It doesn't involve you directly. Here's the most important part. You have not been solicited to do so. We'll talk more about that because that's important. Because that's the next phrase. I think every phrase in this proverb, Proverbs 26:17, is packed. It's like pass by. Oh, that's important. Meddling. Oh, that's important. A quarrel. That's important. And then this phrase that we've really kind of already talked about. Not his own. It's not yours. In Proverbs chapter 5, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. It says, drink water from your own cistern. In other words, in the context, it's talking about adultery. And it's saying, you got a wife. That's your source of gratification and intimacy. That's your source. Draw water from your own cistern. Don't go to some other source. It's not yours. This quarrel, this contention, this strife is not yours. And so you just pass by and jump right in and start, I'm going to help. More like help myself to the drama. But nonetheless, this is the problem. Now, the peril in this proverbial advice or instruction or generality is, if you are accustomed to doing this, you just rush right into somebody else's problem, insert yourself, and jump in. Be careful. Because there's this general truth that is going to turn out bad. And then you might say, well, I have a habit of doing that. It doesn't bite me every time. Well, maybe not. Maybe this is not the 100%. You know, you train up a child the way he'll go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. And there might be exceptional cases where I did that, but it didn't turn out that way. It's a general truth. Let's just say it like this, and this is me saying it. 9 times out of 10, this is what's going to happen to you. Does that make sense? And so the peril is, well, it's kind of like you run up on a dog, and let me just unpack it. And you take it by the ears. Let's think about dogs for just a second. Now, in the ancient culture, dogs are not treated and revered and domesticated in the fashion we do. They just aren't. Nobody, I say this with great confidence. No one ever put clothes on their dogs in antiquity. Now, some of y'all are laughing because you know, we put sweaters on dogs. I remember our dog, it was kind of cold, we'll take our dog for a walk. My wife paid money, good money, to buy a jacket for the dog. I said, God gave him a coat. It's sufficient. I mean, all he's going to do is walk out there, do his business, come right back into this climate-controlled house of ours. Dogs were not treated in that fashion. Dogs are mentioned as having utilitarian purposes. For example, in Isaiah 56 and verse 10, he equates the poor watchman of Israel as being like a dog who can't bark when there's trouble. One thing you got to learn is when the UPS man comes to your house and the dog barks at it, don't correct your dog. That's what your dog's supposed to do. I mean, it's better than an alarm system. But the idea is that they have a point and purpose, and they would have utilitarian use. They'll bark and watch out. In Job chapter 30, it talks about how dogs would be part of helping and maintaining and overseeing the flock. Dogs would have the ability to help the sheep and keep them from predators, or at least alarm if predators came. Or in Exodus chapter 22, there's a description of the nature of dogs of this time being scavengers. I'm almost embarrassed to say this. I'm glad my dad doesn't listen to the sermons for this reason. My dog's allergic to certain things, so it gets special food. We buy food because my dog's allergic to chicken. You ever heard of a dog being allergic to chicken? Mine is. So we have to buy a special, very expensive dog food with no chicken in it. When I was growing up, dogs ate whatever they could get. A frog, a lizard, a bird, something I'm like, I don't know what that is. And if it was lucky, a few scraps from the table. That's all dogs got. That's what dogs were like. They were scavengers. If you go out of the country, you'll see dogs are treated differently in most countries. They kind of just roam around, kind of like when we were growing up as kids. You know, they'd come around, go up. That's dogs. Not, don't think domesticated one in my lap, I put a sweater on it and take a Christmas card picture with it. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a scavenger dog. It is not domesticated. It's not yours. And you grab it by the ears. Now, I put a verse up there if you wanted it. What's this word ear mean? It just means ear, like an ear of an animal. The ear that was required for you to keep a piece of it. If an animal came and took the sheep, you keep a piece of its ear, just ear. So you take it by the ears. I'm not real smart, but I know a little bit about dogs. I've been around them pretty much my whole life. If you take one you don't know and grab it by the ears, what might you expect it to do? Bite you. Bite you. And the idea is, if you rush right into somebody else's strife, conflict as a passerby, and you meddle in it, and it's their quarrel, it's not your own. It's like grabbing a dog by the ear. Not little Fluffy from the Christmas card picture, but a stray dog that is surviving on its own and unpredictable, not domesticated. It's going to bite you. And so the point that's made is that would be foolish. Now, if you know the dog, it's your dog, friend's dog you're familiar with, you can go pet it and all that. But you go outside the country, for instance, go up to a stray dog. I've had, what's funny is I got a picture, and my family thinks it's hilarious. We were doing some missionary work in Mexico, and you see the picture of me with some people that live there in these very run-down, humble houses. They were metal with blue tarps for roofs. That was their house. And we're standing outside. We gave them some care packages. I'm standing there, and in the picture, there's a dog right here, about that far from my hind end. And they took the picture. And right after the picture, that dog bit the fire out of me right in the back of my leg. I guess I just, he didn't. You've got to be careful. The peril, it's foolish for you to put yourself in a situation where you could be bit by a dog because you thought I'd just grab it by the ears. In Proverbs chapter 25, let's look over there. Look at verse 19 there. It says, confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble. Let me just stop. I don't know if you like to watch Andy Griffith, but I would recommend it. Barney is what makes Andy Griffith worth watching. It's him and Ernest T. Bass, but Ernest T. Bass doesn't come on there but from every now and then. But Barney Fife, the bumbling, imbecile, I guess, he's a lovable doofus. I don't know what the right term is. But on many occasions, the writers used the scenario more than once. You might remember this. Different episodes where there would be an escaped convict from up in, Raleigh or something, and he's coming through Mayberry. And what would invariably happen was Andy would trust Barney to do something, and what would happen every time? Well, the criminal would catch Barney or catch Andy or catch them both because you were putting your trust in Barney Fife to, Andy would tell him to do this, and he would violate that, and then they both get in trouble. It's just kind of like that. That's what I think about when I look at this verse. All right, look at Proverbs 25:19 again. We looked at the first part. Confidence in Barney Fife when you got trouble, right? You put your confidence there in an unfaithful man. What's that like? It's like a bad tooth or a foot out of joint. Well, anybody in here ever had a bad tooth? Abscessed tooth? How's that feel? Hurts. Painful. You can get a foot out of joint. You can go to an orthopedic specialist. You can get rehab. Your insurance will cover it. Well, not 3,000, 4,000 years ago. And so what would you do? It would hurt, and you'd walk around with a limp. So there's pain involved. It would be foolish. It would be painful. It would be even dangerous. He's talking about the propensity for a dog that you grab to bite you. On other occasions, not in the same context, we have warnings, for example, about alcohol, that it bites like a serpent. And what's the point? Don't fool with that stuff. It's dangerous. Don't fool with that stuff. It'll bite you. Don't fool with it or you will get the consequences. Can't escape. That's the peril. All right, is everybody with me? If you're a passerby and you meddle in somebody else's affair, it's kind of like grabbing a stray dog by the ears and getting bit. Whose fault would that be, incidentally, if you grabbed a stray dog by the ears? Yours. And that's the warning. That's the caution. Don't make it your practice to meddle in other people's affairs. All right, let's talk about the practical, because that starts with a P. All of this, I hope, is practical. But what I'm saying is, let's think about, well, some things that we might draw from this. First, know your role. Know your role. Even Jesus knew his role. Now, these are familiar verses. You can write them down, look them up yourself. I'll give you a brief paraphrase of it. The gist of it is Jesus is preaching and teaching, and he's interrupted. As you read the text, presumably, somebody shouts out, "Tell my brother to split the inheritance with me." You remember what Jesus said? "Well, meet me down at the tax office. Me and you square that away, and I'll oversee the proceedings of y'all working out this will together." No, that's not what he said. He said, "Man, who made me an arbitrator over you?" And then he told them, "Beware of covetousness." In other words, don't worry about that. You got bigger fish to fry. I got more important things to share and teach and tell you. You're sitting at my feet, not that I can settle a dispute between you and your brother over something that ain't got nothing to do with me. That's not my role. You know what your problem is? That's not your role. You know what you ought to do? Well, no, that's not your role. Now, I will make a distinction in just a moment. There are times when you do get involved. But there's this notion in the New Testament, akin to meddling, that is being a busybody. Let's look at a couple of those verses ever so quickly. Look in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 11. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 11. "For we hear that there are some who walk among you in a disorderly manner, not working at all, but are busybodies." Now, he said in the previous verse, if any man won't work, if anyone will not work, neither will he eat. And he said, what you're doing is you're being idle, and you're going around being a busybody in other people's business. You're going over to their house. You're dealing with them. You're in their business. You ought to be doing other stuff. Look at another occasion in 1 Timothy, probably just a couple of pages over. Again, this idea. Look at chapter 5 and note verse 13 there. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 13. "And besides, they learn to be idle." And this is talking about widows in particular. You can get to the first part of the chapter and pick up the context if you'd like. But look at verse 13. "And besides, they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things they ought not say." They're meddling. They're being busybodies. They're concerned in someone else's affairs. You got stuff you should be attending to. We'll talk more about that, too, in just a minute. All right, I've said this several times. I've used this phrase because I think it's important. Unsolicited engagement. Unsolicited. You're a passerby. Me and this person, these two parties are having this quarrel, strife, contention, conflict. You're just passing by. But you want to rush in, jump in, and interject. Engage in this unsolicited. Be careful. Might not burn you every time, but at least 9 times out of 10, you're going to wish you hadn't. It's foolish, and it can be painful. Look over in 1 Peter chapter 4. 1 Peter chapter 4. Drop down to verse 14. Interestingly, this is in the context of suffering. Suffering. Look at 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 14. You reckon if a stray dog bit you, you would be suffering? Yeah. That dog bit me in an area where I got some extra padding, and I was suffering. It was not nice. 1 Peter chapter 4, look at verse 14. "If you are reproached for the name of Christ, blessed are you, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. On their part he's blasphemed, but on your part he's glorified. But let none of you suffer. In other words, if you suffer for good, suffer for doing the right thing, suffer for Christ, you'll be blessed. But he says, but let none of you suffer as a murderer, a thief, an evildoer, or, listen, as a busybody in other people's matters. That's not your business. I won't give you all the particulars, but over the years, I've been the victim, like you, I would imagine, of people meddling in my life affairs, decisions, things that didn't pertain to them at all. I didn't solicit their advice, but they offered it. After all, I got a mother-in-law. That's a joke from a wife. No, but in all seriousness, we've all been victims of people who got themselves in our business and affairs unsolicited. And that's what this is describing. You rushing into a situation, even good intended. You know, if you grab that dog by the ears, you might have been trying to check and see if it had a tick, or see if it was injured, or offer it something to eat, or maybe you were just trying to pet it. All your intentions could have been good, benevolent, but that dog's still going to bite you. Now, there is a distinction. If you are solicited, if you're not meddling in some other person's affair as a bypasser, then you can be a peacemaker. You can help resolve the conflict. You can be engaged. Oftentimes, I'm engaged in other people's conflict. It's called marriage counseling. Or there are other avenues in which you may be solicited. Be a peacemaker. And ultimately, this isn't excusing the requirement for us to attend to our own matters. In other words, you're just a bypasser in somebody else's affair. You're busying yourself in their lives and their matters, and that's not your role. That's not your place. Now, let's just say, for example, you are put in the role to be an elder. Well, you may have the need or necessity to take care of matters that pertain to a whole bunch of individuals. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, it describes, in order to be qualified as an elder, you have to rule over your own house. And then subsequently be qualified to rule over the house of God. Those are your matters. You will give an account for them. I'm not suggesting you don't get involved in other people's affairs. That's your role. I mean, if you're the mama or the daddy and your kids are fighting, you're going to break it up, ain't you? I hope so. I mean, you're not going to say, well, I don't want to get involved in that matter. No. That's your matter. That's your responsibility. That's your own house. Makes sense? That's a bit of a distinction. God wants to keep us with these proverbial nuggets away from pitfalls, snares, traps, pain. If you're going to go down that road and it's going to hurt you, God is trying to say, I'm going to give you the wisdom, don't go down that road. One of the things that people have asked me before is about co-signing a loan. Did you know the Bible says on 2 occasions in the book of Proverbs, don't do that, you'd be a fool? You'd be a fool to sign somebody else. Oh, but it's my granddaughter, and I just love my granddaughter. I'm glad you love your granddaughter, and you can do it if you want. I mean, and I can't say that it would be a sin for you to co-sign for your granddaughter so she can get this car, even though she doesn't have a job, and I really don't know how she's going to pay for it, and you ask my advice. But it's not a sin if you do it. But I sure would like to keep you from... I've seen this movie before, and she's going to wreck the car. And she can be upside down in that car. And you co-sign, and they're going to come for you. I would like to spare you from that unnecessary pain. But it wouldn't be a sin if you did it. I can't say it'd be a sin, but it'd be foolish. In Matthew chapter 7, it cautions us even about sharing the gospel. You know, we found that pearl of great price. Because we found it, we were willing to sell everything we had so that we could just have this pearl that we discovered. But then he says, don't take that pearl and cast it before swine, lest they trample it and turn and devour you. I mean, it's kind of like that dog. You know, I wanted to help. Have you ever heard of those people, good Samaritans, if you will, who two people were fighting, and they tried to jump in and break up the fight, and end up getting stabbed or shot in the process? It happens. I mean, this is not some fictitious story, although I'm not giving you names. It happens all the time. Try to break up a fight between two people and end up getting stabbed and dying. I'd like to keep you from any needless pain with this bit of proverbial wisdom. But you know, if we're busy with our own business, we won't have time to be minding business that's not our own. I want to go over to the passage that I told you was in the Bible in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. It's verse 11. Look at verse 11. Look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 11. He's encouraged them a number of things, including that you aspire to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, to work with your own hands. In other words, not being a busybody in other people's houses and going house to house and saying, you got something I could eat? No. You need to mind your own business and work with your own hands as we've commanded you. Look, if you're minding your business, you'll have enough to do that other people's business will fall so far off your radar. You remember the passage well. I'm just going to hit the highlights of Matthew chapter 7, where we're reminded that before we get into the business of inspecting people's eyes and the speck of wood that might be there, that we realize and tend to the fact and consider that we have a plank in our own. In other words, we need to attend to our own affairs, deal with our own matters, deal with our own conflict. I bet there's some conflict in your own house that you could deal with, or in somebody that would genuinely solicit you, as opposed to being a busybody and meddling and involving yourself in things that don't pertain to you. Now, this isn't a lesson on why people do that. That's a whole other lesson. But this is a caution. This is a caution. And this is a caution that you can implement probably, maybe even before the sun goes down, but certainly before we meet next time. And so I want to encourage you. Avoid needless pain. But ultimately, my encouragement to you is to avoid predicted pain. The torment of separation and banishment from God is foretold. The consequences are prearranged and told to you. If you find yourself outside of Christ, you'll suffer the consequences of torment. And so the gospel is the good news of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, and the substitution of his sacrifice for you. If you'll accept it, confess him before men, turn from your sins and be baptized for the remission of your sins, you can be added to the saved. And maybe you need to do just that. Or maybe you have some other need that we could address or help you with or be a resource for you. If for any reason you're subject to the invitation, won't you come while we stand together and sing?